If you love liberty, declare your independence by signing the Shire Society Declaration at shiresociety.com.
So my name is Joseph Stallcop. I am the representative of Keene in Cheshire Ward 4. I had originally ran as a Democrat, but through a lot of really just personally looking at politics, personally looking at the way things were being dealt with up in Concord, I had ended up going into the Libertarian Party. And today I kind of just want to give a little bit of a basic introduction into what being a libertarian is, and not just in forms of politics, but also too in living and other aspects of life. And since the theme of the teaching is supposed to be insiders and outsiders, just to show how even as an outside group we are really gaining a lot of strength in this. So I'm going to do this, and then not too many of you, but I'll have like a short Q&A afterwards, so any questions y'all have, I'm here to answer. Okay. So. Yep. So first off, I'll actually pose a little question to you guys. What do you think of when you hear the word libertarian? Like, what comes to mind?
For me, it's fiscally conservative, liberally, domestically liberal.
That's actually a really good view of it compared to some of the answers we get. I've definitely gotten some not so kind responses to that question. Any of y'all have any more ideas of what you think of when you hear libertarian?
That's just like a third party in like our political system.
Yeah, just as valid, just as true. So instead of going into a long analysis or something like that, I actually have a video with Ken Gillette, who is a famous magician and comedian, and he's also a very big proponent of libertarianism. And this is kind of just a little short way as he sees it. So
let me turn this back to politics, because I know you're a libertarian. You're a real... It's not kind of now. I think you're more than kind of. I think you're a very serious libertarian. And you know, it's funny, people still say to me, after all these years, you know, you're not a real libertarian, Bill Maher. I heard you say you are. You know, this started in the 90s when I wanted to be able to smoke pot without the meddling federal government on my case.
And that's all you need.
But that's all you need. I always said that the definition for me of libertarian was, as long as I do something, it doesn't hurt somebody else, I should be allowed to do it. I think libertarians, it's become radicalized. This new Rand Paul type of libertarianism.
My feeling of libertarianism is if you want to get to utopia, you take your first left on sex and your first right on money. I just think that the more freedom you can get, the better. I don't see why. I want to answer every question, start every question, and this is not the finish, but start every question with, is there any way we can solve this problem with more freedom instead of less?
You must like that.
I love it.
No,
that's like your book.
Absolutely. Yep.
And also, but the morality does matter. I mean, it's never talked about. It's always pragmatic in politics. But my question is, the government should only use violence for things I'm willing to use violence for. I would use violence, except for being a coward. But put that aside. Theoretically, I would use violence to stop a murder, to stop a rape. I would not use violence to build a library. So I will argue with you that we should build a library. I will raise money for a library. I will work for a library, but I will not say, well, we need to bring tax people with guns to say, okay, Bill, we need a library. For defense, I'll do it.
We have the internet.
That's a little short clip from that. So I think the first thing to bring up with libertarianism is a pretty central tenet. Some people go back and forth on this, but it's the harm or non-aggression principle. And a little quote I have here from John Stuart Mill, who was a famous English philosopher. He also was one of the first votes in Parliament for women's suffrage. And he had said that the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. So really, what this means in the scope of things is libertarian is based on the idea that you should not harm or coerce others with aggression unless they are doing so to you and it's in defense. And this is something that at first really isn't controversial. Like, most of us have the whole golden rule thing, do unto others as they do unto you. You're not going to come up and just like punch some random person for the sake of it. That's like completely wrong in society. Where this can become a little harder for some people, though, is with aspects of government. So whereas most people would complain saying like, well, what's wrong with having this program that involves like taxing people to create this program? Like, what's wrong with that? What's the issue? Like, how is this violence? Well, a little factor to think about the fact is, what happens if you decide that you don't, well, let's use like war, because this is an area that there's a lot of people that like are very against the war. Let's say you decide, you know what, I'm gonna look up and find out how much of my tax money is going to war or going to defense, and I'm not gonna pay that. I'm just gonna say, you know what, screw it, I am completely against this morally. Chances are you're not going to have a very good evening. Chances are if you wait long enough, the IRS is going to start sending you notices. And if you pull this further and further again, you eventually will have police at your door. And if you keep resisting, this could lead to violence and eventually death on your part. So if you break it down, there is moral complications to these issues. And this is, again, this is the first layer of libertarianism. There's also other ways to look at it. One of the ways I personally look at it is local, doing things at your own personal level. So let's say that as like the library idea, say you need a library and you want to get one set up. Well, I personally feel that it's much more gratifying and ends up being much better if we can grab the people from the community that all agree, yeah, we should do this, and work our funds together and find a way to set this up. Because by doing it this way, you're actually able to have control over what you want. You know what your community wants. You're not outsourcing it to someone that's like, I have this idea that's against yours, but you know what, I'm in charge. So you have that. And another good thing to think about is the fact that by doing things locally, getting things done on your own, and really working together for common goals, you don't have to worry about things being taken away. Because one of the issues with getting things done through just government is that we are a democracy. That means votes matter, which means that if someone comes through and doesn't like your ideas and gets enough votes, guess what? Your idea now gone. And that can be kind of hard for some people, because if we're an entire government-based society, that means that your entire life is basically a struggle to win an election. You constantly have to be in fear of someone else getting in power and taking away like what you've strived your entire life for, especially if you're really involved with grassroots and like trying with protests and stuff to keep your program. You are constantly going to have to live with the thought in the back of your head that that could just disappear like that, and you don't really have a say in it if enough people don't want it. Little tangent I went on that. So quick facts. A lot of the ideas to which libertarianism came out of, such as classical liberalism, free markets, consent of the governed, came from 16th to 18th century philosophy. These are ideas that have been around for a long time, so these are things that have been honed down and really looked at. Even though we are a third party, and even though the official Libertarian Party in the U.S. came about in the 70s, the basis to which we got a lot of our platforms and ideas from are not new. These are things that have been thought about and talked about for a long time. really good fact is that the first Libertarian VP candidate was and this was during the year of the LP's inception. Tony Nathan was the first woman and the first American Jew to receive an electoral vote in a presidential election. So it really shows that when the party was created that there was some groundbreaking things happening. The fact that someone could rise out of a third party and break down barriers such as race and sex, which, again, back in the 70s, these were still things that were being fought hard for, is really spectacular, and I am proud of that little fact of history from this. And also, the Libertarian Party is currently the third largest party in the U.S. and has candidates on the ballot in all 50 states. So no matter where you go, every single state will have at least one little party and at least one person running at the time. So, who are libertarians? Who can be libertarians? Who fits the bill? In reality, anyone can be libertarian. There is no barriers for race, religion, gender identity, sexual preference, and even ideology. And when I say this, some people get kind of confused and thinking like, oh, like how can it be true for ideology? Like, couldn't a liberal not be a libertarian because of government and stuff like that? And I'm like, not true necessarily. So we don't believe in using a lot of government to obtain our means. However, this doesn't mean that you have to be a very strong conservative. There's actually some people that believe a lot in communist and Marxist ideas, such as setting up communes and working that way, but they can still be classified under the libertarian umbrella because they don't want to use the government for that to happen. Instead of saying, we're going to set up a communist society where the government says this is what must happen, they say, you know what? We just want to go off on here. We're going to start our own little commune. If someone wants to leave, they can. We're not going to force anyone to do anything. That's that. They can be libertarian. It's, even though it's usually seen as an ideology that skews more to the right, depending on who you talk to about this, you can really go across the spectrum. And the way I see it is there's no markers here, but imagine it as two different axes. So you got up and down, left and right. Everyone talks about left and right. You got your liberals, your conservatives, more government, less government. That's all they talk about. In reality, I see it differently. You got also your axis coming down here. Up here, I would say is more government. Down here is less government. So I see a lot of the left and right really has, in my opinion, to do with how you run society and what your social values are. So whereas conservatives are usually, they have a lot more of a religious focus, they have different social values than someone who's very, very liberal. Both of them can pull under libertarian if they're not having the state like control and enforce those social values. However, on the other hand, Democrats and Republicans can actually be considered very state-worthy. So there's a lot of candidates out there that are very much so, we want the state to do this, we want the state to do that. One of the interesting factors that came up with the Libertarian Party, and actually with some conflicts, was during the recent election, that whereas some conservatives were fighting with libertarians saying like, well, why don't you find Trump to be a good candidate? Like, literally all the different complaints that could be brought up with someone who would be more liberal could actually be brought up, liberal, state-friendly, could be brought up with Trump in terms of wants to use the government to achieve means, very high emphasis on the military, like wants to instill programs with high tax, things like that. So when people come up and say, oh yeah, libertarians, like, they're big Trump fans, blah, 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 blah. Actually, if you bring it down, not really. There's a lot of issues that people in my party actually have with the current president. So I feel that that brings more to the stereotypes and myths, but we'll talk about that later. So, common views. What do we believe? One of the big things I'd say first is personal responsibility. And this is a phrase that can be a little controversial because people hear it and they think personal responsibility, that means that no one should help you, you're all by yourself, yada, yada, yada. Not necessarily. The first thing is responsible for your actions. So essentially, you go out, you kill someone, you are responsible for that. And most of us would agree that if you cause harm to someone, that is on you. However, that also means that you should have control with those actions. So if you want to go, let's say, you're going to go drive a car and you're going to drive it without a seatbelt, that's your choice. So long as you are not going to cause harm to someone else in the car, if you get in an accident and you die because of that, you made that decision. That's your decision. And really just accepting some of the consequences that happen from our behavior. That if we do like really dumb, stupid things and we get hurt and injured from them, that is a possibility of doing dumb and stupid things. What this also does mean, though, for personal responsibility is we are responsible personally for the goals to which we want to achieve. So going back to the library situation, if I actually say we need a library, I find that there's a lot of people that want one and I think it really needs to happen, that I'm going to take that personal responsibility on myself to say, you know what, I'm going to start a program to help create this library. I'm going to do the crowd fundraising. I'm going to do the setting it up and finding people to help work on this. I am going to do this. And that's a big factor. It's not just saying, we need this program, so let's go find some person that we can get in that'll figure it out, and then just leaving it as that. It's really recognizing when you want something that you have the power and the ability to get things done. And I really find this is an empowering thing, because at the end of the day, what do you feel really like has a bigger impact on your life? Knowing that you were one 300 million, 400 million, like a tiny little bit of a vote that could have created something, or knowing that you personally took it upon yourself to help build an institution that can last for years and really helps people. Next one is freedom. This has a lot of different aspects to it. You got like free markets, free speech. For some libertarians, it's a lot less restrictive borders, immigration reform, so not being as stringent on that. A lot of people believe that outside of the degree of safety to some level, people should have the ability to go up and move where they want to. So if I want to go over to another country, that's putting all these restrictions, everything like that, just for me being able to walk from one side of the street to another side of the street is insanity. Abortion is another one. There is some people that are libertarians that are very much against abortion. There is some people that are libertarians that are very much okay with pro-choice. The way that it really is seen at the end of the day, though, is the government shouldn't be the force getting involved with this. So let's say that person A over here is very much pro-life, against abortion, doesn't like it. If they are libertarian, they can do things like, first off, not getting one, creating groups of people that's like pretty much are pro-life. Spreading information to people, working in communities, and like doing things that could help prevent the amount of abortions that are occurring. But just because they're not necessarily going to go and like say, you know what, no more abortions for anyone. Like they recognize that by doing that, the same can be done to them on some level. I think a good way that this was brought out in another video I saw was it was a comparison with abortion and then on the capital punishment issue, because those are the two big things. Different groups see them as murder, different groups see them as justified. And the person in charge who was like speaking about this says, here's the thing. Your sides are never probably going to agree in giving a definition to either of these. This is going to be a fight that's going to go on forever. The point is, by one group saying that this is completely, and this is like the better way to put it is that the government should get involved with this issue is gonna basically start more fights. And it can get more controversial because of the issue of funding programs like this. One of the ways that the speaker had talked about it would be that when you fund either of these, when the government funds capital punishment, when the government funds services that enable abortion, and not just abortion, but just a lot of services in general, when that funding is coming from that entity, that's going to start the conflicts and fights that really halt progress for a lot of us in society. And that instead of doing it that way, that for the issue of abortion and other things like that, if we can get people to work together and to get the funding and to create these programs that enable women to have the ability to do this, that it's not going to be as much of this tense and often violent political climate that we have when people are basically having no choice and end up forced to pay for certain things. That you're never going to calm down the climate fully, but to be able to bring it down to a level where not only are you not going to have oftentimes the violence that occurs, especially after some of the issues with Planned Parenthood, when people were trying to start violence because of that, because they were angry that they were contributing to it. Also, too, making sure that women have this access. Because I think one of the things that's problematic is when we go full government-style funding with it as a democracy, that means that there is, again, the chance that these programs could be cut. And whereas if we are able to work together and get this funding on our own, we can guarantee we can continue these programs. When it is straight government funding, they can always get cut out. And the worst part about these programs just getting cut out like that is it leaves a lot of people in uncertainty and like they have no access, they have nothing. And it's really hard to try to quickly set something up afterwards. It's better to lay the groundwork on our own. Same-sex marriage was another issue that actually the Libertarian Party has been backing this for a very long time, actually before the two-party system backed it. I went to a convention that they were actually passing out pamphlets, and these pamphlets were very old. They've been reprinted, but some of the things from this have been coming out since the 70s, in which people were saying, if they are not harming people, then why does it matter? It's like you don't have to condone something in order for you to say that the government shouldn't get involved. Free speech actually is another way to put this. That's whereas I would never condone and be fine with a lot of the horrible things that people say, I'm still not going to come down and start restricting what everyone says. I'm not going to be putting those things down by threat of violence or force. Because if I do that, who's to say someone tomorrow isn't going to do the same to me? We can't predict who's going to be the next president, the next senators, the next congresspeople. We really can't. And another one is peace. And this is something that isn't talked about as much. Libertarians, by definition, are a lot more non-intervention. So in other words, we are not a war-prone group. We're actually very anti-war to a degree. Unless we're not completely pacifist, so we're not going to be like, oh, if someone's attacking us, we're just going to stand back and say, we can't fight. But we have the belief that we should never be the ones to start aggression. That we should have defense, but keep it as that word defense. Defense shouldn't be invading other countries. Defense shouldn't be trying to install another government into a place. That is not where we should be. And the death penalty is also something that falls along this line. We don't believe that the government should have the ability to kill people. We don't think that that should be, if If a person is in jail and is not harming other people, then for you to kill that person, we think is morally wrong. It goes back again to the non-aggression principle. And a big one too, and there's a different way I see this, is unnecessary taxation and restrictive laws. And some people have problems with this, again, because they're just like, well, these are important programs, and then for laws that, like, a lot of the laws keep us safe in terms of, losing the word right now, putting measurements in that, that say you need certain licensing, stuff like that. Well, again, the issue we find is that the more laws you have, the more potential for danger you can end up with. If you look at the issue with police brutality, of all the different cases that have occurred, there is a lot of times people are killed over nothing. Look at the one with the I think it's Mike Brown case, where just by having untaxed cigarettes that you're selling, you could end up dead. The fact that the littlest things like that, like the person who created that law probably never thought that I could be making something that could lead to someone's death. They probably thought that, you know what, this will be good, we add some extra funds for the state, yada, yada, yada. But everything you create could cause problems when you back things up with violence. So it really is, at the end of the day, us thinking, what is the outcome of our actions? Is there a better way to do things? Like Gillette was saying. So, outsider. One of the common problems, we are an outside group. We're not your mainstream Republicans and Democrats, and to some degree we really don't have that mainstream exposure. Like, if you look at media, everyone knows that Fox News has a more conservative spin to it. MSNBC, certain companies like that have a more liberal spin to it. We really don't have those organizations. We really don't have as much of a mouthpiece talking about libertarianism. So with that, you have issues of stigma. One of the common jokes that's always made about libertarians is about, oh yeah, you guys hate roads and you hate these and you hate that. We don't hate these things. Just as Gillette had mentioned with the library, we're not saying that there shouldn't be a library. We believe that there's a lot of things there should definitely be. There's a lot of programs that help people immensely that should exist. We want to come together and help make these, just not using the government as much as currently is used. And again, this goes back to the fact that this is a wide umbrella, so there's different people who say different things. Some people are very much against programs, and some people that are very much for them in this issue. But at the end of the day, we can all agree upon people should have the ability to make these programs. People, like, if someone wants to create let's say, create a homeless shelter, and they want to create a meal kitchen with that, they should have that ability. They should definitely be able to do that. They should work to their full potential in order to create this. Another issue too is that it's not taken as a serious alternative. I think that this is a two-part problem. Some of it is on us, some of it is on media perception. So you probably all remember during the last election, people would always make the jokes like, oh yeah, the Libertarians and then the Green Party, like, why do you guys even bother? And it got very heated at points because of this. On one hand, I think that we aren't given a chance by a lot of people, but at the same time, I think some of this is understandable because we still don't have as much of a presence. I think that there's a lot more outreach and a lot more that needs to be done. We're currently working on doing this, essentially. We're really trying to do programs to teach people. Like, one of the reasons I came here is to really help with this, to be able to show that we are an actual established group and that we have an identity. Media portrayal, that's another one. If you go on YouTube and type in libertarian cringe comp, you can find a lot of those. It's a lot of series of videos where they just find people that are libertarians saying the most off-the-wall things. We all know that in every group you're going to have a couple of those slightly strange individuals that will definitely talk on camera and the internet. And we're not as well respected in politics. And I can say this with personal experience. I'm currently in a 3-person caucus, so there's 3 libertarians in the State House right now. And we have gotten like some really disrespectful manners from other people. I know one of my colleagues was actually in public mentioned that he shouldn't be, and they were trying to push him from not attending meetings for some Republican things. Even though he wasn't there to even spread any messages, he was there because he knew some of the people there and he was wanting to talk with them. There's been some jokes made by people about us saying like, oh yeah, your little group over there, and just like some snarky attitudes. But then again, on the other hand, there's some people who really stand for us and believe in what we have to offer. There's people that say, like, we wish we had the strength to do what you guys are doing, and we hope that you can get more prominence so that maybe we could get involved too. And I think that's one of the best ways to put it is, we are growing and we are improving. The fact that such comments and attitudes are being put at us might be seen as negative, but it also shows that we are effective. We have 3 libertarian candidates, 3 third-party candidates in 1 year left their parties, came into this. That may seem small, but that is really big for the fact that there are states without libertarians in their entire states in terms of government. So we're getting there. And for one of the last points I want to bring up is, how can I help? Anyone can get educated, anyone can dispel myths, and anyone could help push for ballot access. By having ballot access, this means that people have the ability to actually register for the party, and there's a lot of extras that can be gained from this. We actually gained ballot access through the last election, which is why me and my colleagues were able to register as libertarian and didn't just have to go the independent route. This enables better primaries and things like that. But we really need to keep this, and we really need to be able to get this in other states, because by not doing this, you dump everyone into the independent basket and it makes everything a lot harder. So even if you even if you completely hate libertarianism and you don't agree with any of this, by doing ballot access, it improves democracy, it allows third parties to actually have some ability there. So anyone can really just help push for it, like talk to your legislators and really say, we really need this. For any of those that do think that they are interested in this, look into your local party, talk with people, find other libertarians, and just really get an idea what they think about. Like, even before I had gone into this, there was times where I didn't really know much about libertarianism, and I talked with libertarians, I read a lot of information on it, and I had found that there was a lot of similarities that I had never noticed because I didn't know really what it meant to be a libertarian. Just get as educated as you can for this. If you find that really you are interested in this, feel free to register. Definitely get out there and vote, get involved. There was a lot of canvassing from Republicans and Democrats during the last election cycle here. Just by having people on campus, though, that enables more than just the two political groups to actually do things and get involved like the other two do. And even run for office. We constantly are trying to get people that feel they have the ability and the connection to the community to do that, and it's a very important thing. I think the final remarks I make is just this idea that I came up with is that anything voted in can be voted out. Any powers given can take others away. And I think that's one of the biggest things to really envision it when if you're going to only take one thing from this speech, that would be really it. So no matter what you want in life, know that there is more than one way to do it. And that is my presentation. So if there's any questions, I'd love to take them from people.
So, and I feel like learning about libertarianism now, you're really putting trust morally in the people, where the majority of something has to be good instead of bad. They have to be giving still. With that, how do you feel? What's the libertarians' take on, say, healthcare? Would they want? I'll just let you answer.
So healthcare is one of those very large, very complicated issues, and on one hand, I can't speak as a analysis for everything on this. I can give what I've really grasped so far. I feel there definitely should be programs for people that can't afford it. I think that getting those programs created privately, there's a lot of good that can be done from that. By doing that, that means that these programs can't be taken away. And I think that's one of the dangers is, if we were to have come up with all private programs to help people that really needed for healthcare, for that bottom barrel that everyone talks about, we wouldn't have some of the frustration and mess that is currently brewing when you have the two political forces like clashing, saying we want this, we want that, and yanking people back and forth, saying you have healthcare now you don't, back and forth. I think by doing it privately, doing it together, we can set something up and we can make sure this thing stands. On other terms though, I feel that there is other ways healthcare hasn't been looked at as much. I think the idea of co-ops actually really intrigues me. Someone I know, which was illegal, they will say that, they had a family member who worked at a place, and the place was really just sick and tired of dealing with the back and forth with healthcare, not knowing how to work it. So they weren't supposed to, but they did this anyway, and I don't think they ever got caught for it. They said, you know what? Anyone that wants to get involved, let's all pool our money together in this, and let's just do our own insurance program. The company had the amount of funds to do it, and people wanted to get involved, and they created a way that people could go to the hospital, and the way they worked it out, it was even cheaper times, because like the hospital would rather deal with you paying than having to go through the loopholes with insurance of red tape and is this person insured, the back and forth, and they were able to do a really good way with it. I think that there is other ways of thinking about the healthcare issue that we haven't really thought about. And I think that the back and forth from the two-party system saying, let's just give people healthcare straight out, let's no, people should work for it, blah, blah, blah. I think there's more alternatives. And I think one thing I will say too about the healthcare issue is that we really need to look too at the cost problem. One of the dangers I feel, and other countries have found this too with the universal healthcare issue, is that gives a lot of free rein to the companies that are providing these services. So if, let's just say you run a pharmaceutical company and all of a sudden the government of a country says, you know what, we're going to pay for everything. You can just have a nice free little day to start rising your prices because they're going to pay for anything. It doesn't really matter. There has been other ways for people to do things, and again, as I say, I'm not an expert on this stuff. If I had a lot of time to look into it, definitely if I was ever at a federal level for Senate or something like that, this would be something I'd want to get more into because there's a lot of aspects to this. But I think my biggest goal is, have we looked through all the options, or are we just jumping at the big two ideas that always come up? And I feel like we really want to look deeper, because I think that there's some ideas that could be really good that we haven't thought as much about.
So I think that with libertarianism, there's many good aspects to it, but I think one flaw to it is that not everybody, you don't have to work together. So libertarianism tells you you can mind your own business. So while you have healthcare, you need everybody to pool in for healthcare. If you have only sick people paying into healthcare that can't really afford it, you're never going to create programs to be able to really effectively make these people healthy. You need everybody on board. And the problem, I believe, with libertarianism in this aspect is that no one has to be on board. Where if you make a lot of money, you can just go and get your own healthcare. You can go and pay your bills fine. But when you can't really afford it, are these rich people really going to give you incentives to, like, are rich people really going to pool in their money to help these rich or sick people, even though, because it takes a slash out of their profits? And I feel like what we try to do now on the right now with healthcare, it really doesn't work, where not everybody is pooling in together. So I think libertarianism really works, but I think a flaw in it is that sometimes you need to work together as a nation, and doesn't do
and I've actually, that is something I have grappled with for a while too. It's definitely an understandable problem. I think on one aspect, you always have what we call the free riders, so the people who they have what they need, they just don't get in, like, they don't contribute to society in terms of like helping others out. I do feel though we are social beings. If you look at it, like, how many charities are there, especially from, like, you have people like Bill Gates that are giving loads of money to organizations that need it. So I definitely feel in my heart that whether or not there is more, or whether or not it is that there is decent amount of the people who are really on top that want to help, I feel we'll always have some degree of people that really want to get involved. And I will say this, and this is something we bring up a lot in our poli-sci classes. There's never a perfect solution. Every system has its problems. The one I say is it more impossible to get people to work together, or is it more impossible to set up a system in the government and make sure that system lasts forever and never gets voted out in a democracy? We can weigh the issues back and forth. There's like no, I can't stand here today and say libertarianism is actually perfect and there's no problems with it. Every system has problems. We're humans, we are flawed creatures, and we will create solutions with flaws in them. That's natural. I personally feel that I sometimes have a little more belief in the people around me, though, than necessarily the big programs that no one comes in contact with, because I feel if me, you, and everyone in this room got together and created something, we'd be much more heartfelt to keep it going than necessarily people voting things in and people that didn't voting it in still having an option to change.
That's true. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Sort of outside question, but it sort of tags on with that library program you were talking about at the beginning. That's a program that the government puts on, makes a public library that a lot of people can come in and use. Other programs that are pretty useful to us are like fire companies and police stations and such like that. Is there an idea that libertarians would have those sort of be privatized, or do they still want to use the government for those sorts of things?
So this is where we get into the fun controversy of it all. Libertarianism, again, it's a big umbrella, and there is definitely lines where you go from libertarianism to more anarchist groups. One of the things I'd say is that most mainstream libertarians, and this a lot of people would say that for programs that are definitely keeping people safe, that can be something the government does. There is other groups that say like that private organizations should be the ones to take up more of the slack. It goes back and forth on, it really depends really on where you are on the scope of things. And the best way I would put this is that the KSC Republicans did a talk last year, and they had mentioned the same thing. This isn't just like a central thing. This really can range from one side to the other, so it depends on who you're asking with.
and I guess follow up on that would be, where does education lie then? Because education does improve the state of people and improve their ability to live in the society, but at the same point, it's a drain on the governments.
I think, so if we're talking more of a mainstream way of saying it, I think the best way to put it would be definite school choice. Let people have the option to do that. By doing that, it lowers, it both enables the schools to exist, public school, but also does give people the ability that if they don't want to be involved with that they can go and have their kid attend another place. When you break down from there though, as I said before, it also depends on where you are on the standard. Some people are say, you know what, I believe hands down there should be only private schools, that people should come together and create these things. One of the ideas I personally have seen and has intrigued me a lot was the idea of community schools. This is something that hasn't been done a lot since, I want to say, the 60s was one of the last booms for it. And one of the interesting things I found was the Black Panthers group had actually been a big proponent with this. A lot of the programs that were later taken over by the government actually had some roots with them. The lunch programs, some of the community schools, things like that. They had established these because they had said the current system doesn't work and we're going to just create our own. I do like that aspect. Now, I feel that some of those ideas could very well equip people. But as I will say before, it really is a spectrum. The way I really like that Gillette puts it though is that we're not saying that there is this hard, definite, no, yes deal. The biggest thing we're saying is we should take a step back and always ask ourselves, is there other ways to do this? And not just the other ways that the higher powers give us, but can we think of other creative ways to accomplish our goals? And if we can, why not try them out first? Just to not always jump at government for the first option, the biggest option. Any other questions?
I have a concern, and I understand and am in agreement with several of your ideas, and government is too much and too many programs. And you keep talking about the private sector and groups of people can get together in a community and create their own. But you don't have any guarantees for many businesses, and some private, lost the word, there are foundations that you can apply for grants for. But they have the right to pull money away from you and limit how much money you're going to get. So how do you feel that you're going to be able to get enough funding in the private sector, in addition to the fact that our financial structure is so out of balance?
I think this is a very valid point too. That is something that we go back and forth on a lot. I think one of the biggest ways I put it is, it's similar to the other issues I've had before, is can we necessarily guarantee though that government grants and things like that will not disappear tomorrow because someone gets voted in and says, you know what, we spend too much money here, they're gone. I personally feel that with groups of good people, I have a little more faith with getting good people together to do these than I do the common mass as a whole, just giving it through votes. I feel that where groups of good people will always be there and will always get together, the mass always floats, especially with charisma. And when you get those charismatic candidates that come in, they can sway things. So I feel the biggest thing I feel is, and this is the simplest way to put it, at the end of the day, there is no definite guaranteed way to keep programs alive. Whether you look at private sector, whether you look at government, there's no absolute perfect, we're going to do this. Well, let me rephrase it. There is, but then you would be talking about like totalitarian level where it's like there's no changes. We're always keeping this source of government, and people don't want that. I'll say if we're gonna play the game though of whether we should put our trust in people or whether we should put our trust in voters, I tend to go a lot with personal people because this is something I can talk to. I can talk to a group of business leaders that like are interested in starting a program and get to know them and show them how things work. I can't talk to every single one of the voters though that has control over a funding grant or something like that. I can't talk to every single one of them. So I feel I better can guarantee things from a smaller group of people that I know and are in my community than I necessarily can from a large faceless organization.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments, ideas? Well, in that case, that was my presentation. If any of you have any questions you want to ask later, I do have business cards in here. If you are interested in learning more about libertarianism, there's a lot of good sites on the web. One of the big ones would just be the LP Libertarian Party, so feel free to check them out. We have a lot of local groups, so, and again, if anyone wants to take a business card, I can leave them here. Feel free to contact me if you want to get involved or meet anyone at the local level. And that's my thing.
Good job.
Well, thanks, man. Have a good one.